What is up, everybody, and welcome to the beginning of my end of the year lists. As usual, being a movie reviewer and a video game reviewer, all of that. At the end of the year, you like talking about what was the best, what was the worst, most disappointing, most surprising, all of that good stuff. Well, a video that I decided to do for the first time this year, since I have played so many new games in 2021, is to rank every single new video game that I have played across this past year. And I've got 31 titles to talk about. Now, I'm not doing this video alone. My buddy Zach Pope, who I did the Last of Us 2 spoiler chat with, he also joined us on the 31 on 31 Director Showdown earlier this year. He is also going to be putting out a video with this title around the same time as mine. If you're already a subscriber of Zach, which you should be, you'll see it as soon as it goes live. But as his video goes live, I will put the link down in the video description below. So we've got 31 games to talk about across the PlayStation world, the Xbox world, the Nintendo world, as well as one Oculus Quest game that I played. So starting off at number 31, and I'm going to get the hopefully only part of controversy in this video out of the way first. That's going to be Diablo II Resurrected. Now, I know some of you guys out there are diehard Diablo fans, and I know those of you guys that are diehard fans of this franchise, this is probably your favorite game of the entire bunch, because Diablo 2 seems to be the fan favorite. I'm somebody that missed Diablo all the way through my childhood. Every single time they came out with one of these, my PC could never run it, so I never got a chance to play them, and I've always been very curious. So when I saw Diablo 2 was going to be revamped and remade and released to consoles, I pre-ordered this game a couple of weeks in advance. When it came out, I'm telling you guys, I promise, I put at least 5 or 6 hours into this game, trying my best to get into it, but it's just not for me. The whole top-down dungeon thing, it's not my thing. So I'm not saying that Diablo is a terrible game or Diablo 2 Resurrected is a bad remake, because it actually looks like a damn good remake graphically and the way that it works on consoles. Just this type of game is not for me. I wish that it was. I wish I could have popped this in and been like, man, I see all the things that I've missed. I need to go check out Diablo and Diablo 3 now, and when's Diablo 4 coming out? I wish I could say that, but I honestly just gave my best effort to get into this, and Diablo 2 is just something that I do not enjoy whatsoever. I was bored to tears every single time I tried to go through it. Coming in at number 30 is going to be Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood. Now, this is a game that I had heard some rumblings that it wasn't the best game in the world, but it was on a big discount on PSN, so I finally checked it out one day when I was bored, and the reviews were right. I got through maybe a mission and a half of this game. It's not put together very well at all. The concept is cool, being that you're like this werewolf clan and you can go from beast to human, and there's like stealth missions and all of that. Like, the idea on paper is great, but the execution is just such a old school, generically, cheaply made game that even one mission, just all of the objectives that you have to do, feels like something that was revolutionary maybe in the late 90s or the early 2000s. In 2021, you're not exactly impressing anybody with that. So didn't give this game the most fair shot in the world. Maybe it gets awesome after 3 or 4 missions. Maybe there's some defenders of it out there that'll tell me that in the comments, but the time that I spent with it, a couple of hours, it was the most generically made thing that I played the entire year. Coming in at number 29 is going to be Aliens Fireteam Elite. Now, this was one of the most disappointing titles this year because the concept alone really excited me. A team-based online shooter that's just set right in the Aliens world, where you get to play as a colonial marine and you get to go against the xenomorphs. And I played maybe 2 or 3 rounds of this game. I played one of them online with Sean Chandler and his son. That was pretty fun. But it's just such a generic game, and it's such a repetitive game. That's the worst part about it. Like, you go into it, there's just waves of xenomorphs, and you just sit there and shoot with these generic shooting mechanics that feel like they haven't aged since about 2002. You get these weird hybrid xenomorphs that we've never seen before that have certain powers and certain advantages. And that's all the game is you just walk through a hallway, get to a point where you push a button that says, all right, hold off the wave until this button is done doing its thing. And you shoot at xenomorphs for about 5 minutes straight. And then you go to the next room and press the button, and then you shoot at xenomorphs for 5 minutes straight. There's never like boss battles. There's never really a change in setting. There's no kind of any mechanics in the game whatsoever to change up what you are doing. It's just a rail shooter that you can play online with your friends. And so even with playing with Sean Chandler online and playing with his son, which was the most fun that I had with this game, it just feels like at this point it's almost pathetic how poor these alien properties get translated to video games, to the point where only one Alien Isolation has ever gotten it somewhat right. How hard is it to make an Aliens game? This is like the most awesome 80s property of all time to translate into a video game, and they fuck it up every single time. I guess I spoke too soon when I said the only bit of controversy, because I'm sure I'm going to get shit for this one. Number 28 for me is going to be Alan Wake Remastered. Now, I'm somebody that never really got the big hype with Alan Wake when it first came out. I played the game back in the day on Xbox 360, I believe it was. I liked the game. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was this amazing property that everybody has talked about for like the past decade. I'm excited for the sequel. The sequel looks awesome, and I'm very curious on how the more survival horror aspects are going to make me like it more. But this remaster, I played it and I quickly figured out why I never really fell in love with the game in the first place. And that's because the gameplay itself was just so repetitive and just so, not really generic, but just stock. I mean, you shine a flashlight at the person that is coming at you, you shoot them until they explode. And then you just do that over and over and over again. And you collect these little pieces of your manuscript. Now, like, the story is cool, the story's interesting, it's got a good atmosphere in this, like, mountainous town. I like the design of some of the bad guys. It's a fun game for back in the day, but the remaster just makes it where it doesn't really age all that well. It looks nice, but it definitely plays like something from the Xbox 360 era that doesn't necessarily translate well to this one. And being that I was never a humongous fan of Alan Wake, I didn't really have that nostalgia bomb of going back to this game and being able to play it in a remastered fashion. So I would recommend checking this game out if you've been curious, because it's a very affordable game, and now with the sequel coming out, you should play this first one and get caught up on the story and the gameplay mechanics. But as a remaster that's playing on nostalgia, it just didn't really do that for me. Number 27 is Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. Now, this is a game that I have played with my 5-year-old a number of times. I bought it for the Nintendo Switch. This is basically a Nickelodeon ripoff of Super Smash Bros. It's not really even hiding the fact that it's the ripoff of Super Smash Bros. But I enjoy it because I grew up on the old school Nickelodeon, and this has got SpongeBob and Oddworld monsters and Hey Arnold characters and all of that. So that's just cool and fun and nostalgic all on its own. But it works fine as a Super Smash Bros. Ripoff. It's not as intuitive, it's not as fun, it's not as engaging as Smash Bros., but it gets the core concept right. There's a lot of cool settings and soundtracks and everything from these shows that makes it fun. And it's accessible for my 5-year-old to be able to play somewhat. So I just enjoyed it on the fact that I was able to play something with her and see her laugh and giggle at knocking me off of the world and everything like that. So it's not a game that I would rush out and pay full price for. I'll tell you that. Wait for it to be a discount if you ever do get this. But for what I wanted from the game, I got a decent amount of fun out of it. Number 26 is going to be new Pokemon Snap. Now, I'm somebody where I have a lot of nostalgia for the original Pokemon Snap. I used to be a fan of Pokemon, and I grew out of it very quickly. I haven't looked or talked about Pokemon in decades, but my N64 days, this was the first game that I ever got for that system. And I thought it was a damn good game. I have a lot of fond memories playing that old school one. And so when they said they were coming out with a new one, despite the fact that I have no fucking idea about any of these new Pokemon that have come out since the 90s, early 2000s, and I have not played or watched anything Pokemon related in decades, I wanted to get this because of nostalgia and to see if it would kind of rekindle some of that fun that I had with the first game. And to a degree it did. It's kind of the same game. You know, you're on this little cart, this little rail that's going through the world, and you have to take pictures of Pokemon and get them to do different poses, and you can activate certain things to get other bigger Pokemon to come out. So it's very much a newer version of the original game, which is exactly what the title tells you. The only reason I couldn't really engage with it is, one, I'm not a Pokemon fan anymore, and two, most of the species that are walking around this game are not the old classic characters that I grew up with. It's all the new iterations, and so it kind of felt like a foreign world to me. I wasn't seeing Pikachu and Charmander and all these old classic ones walking around. I was seeing all these things and I'm like, what the fuck is that butterfly thing? Number 25 was one that kind of bummed me out, and I feel like I'll be in the minority on this one, and that was Hades. The version that came to PS5 came out this year, so this was a new title for me. I really enjoyed Returnal. You'll see that higher on this list. And I've not really had a whole lot of experience with these roguelite games where you go and then you die and you go all the way back to the beginning. And that's just a new concept to me. I haven't really got into it too much. And because I really enjoyed Returnal, I wanted to go back and play some more of these. And the obvious answer was Hades, because Hades was a game that came out last year, had a lot of awards, everybody seemed to love it, people are calling it like the best roguelite of all time, and so I was very excited to check it out, and I gotta be honest with you, it just didn't do it for me. I don't know if it's the Greek god concept, I don't know if it was the top-down slasher concept, I really don't know what it was, but I played this game for a couple hours, I tried to get into it, I was starting to get a little bit more powers and start to get farther through the world, and I just couldn't get into this one. I don't know, it's just a subjective thing, something about the style, the cel-shaded style with the Greek god concept and all that just didn't come together fully for me. Or maybe it's because I experienced roguelite as a shooter and then going from a third-person shooter to a top-down 2D thing just didn't quite work, but nonetheless, this is a game I can understand why a lot of people really loved it, but like Diablo 2, it's just simply not my thing. Number 24 is going to be Control, the Ultimate Edition. Again, a port that came to PS5 this year. Now this is a game that kind of went under the radar when it came out. I didn't really hear a whole lot about it, but I just kept seeing all these advertisements with all these 4 and 5 star ratings and kept seeing rumblings that people apparently loved this game. So I picked it up cheap whenever it was on discount on PSN. And I played probably about halfway through the storyline, and I liked aspects of it. I thought that the whole, like, isolation in this building was kind of a cool concept, and you access more as you go along. It's kind of like a Metroid light type experience. And I thought that a lot of the gunplay and a lot of the powers and everything was pretty tight as far as the mechanics, but just the story never really grabbed me, and the enemy interactions, the fights and everything started to get a bit repetitive for me. So eventually I will go back and finish this one. I liked it enough to go back and experience the rest of it, but at the time it just didn't grab me on the level that I think the hype led me to believe that it would. And maybe that's my fault, that's what expectations can do. I thought it was a good game, but it certainly wasn't one that was meriting all these 5-star reviews and all this hype that I saw everybody give it. Coming in at number 23 is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. Now this was a nice surprise earlier this year because Tony Hawk Pro Skater was a huge part of my childhood and my early teen years, and then it all but disappeared from the world in the mid to late 2000s and has not done anything worthwhile ever since. And so they went back and they remastered the first 2 games, which seems to be the fan favorites of most Tony Hawk fans, and went back to that old school approach. And I really enjoyed going back to that game where you had to get the skate letters and get the videotapes and try to do certain scores, and it was just a cool nostalgic experience. The soundtrack especially just puts you right back into the 90s when these games were the shit. And it's a really good remaster. Like the mechanics and everything translate very well to modern consoles. They've cleaned it up very nicely. It was a lot of fun to go back to. The only thing that held this one back for me is that I guess I'm the rare breed that actually prefers Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4. Those are the ones that I grew up playing a lot more often. And so I didn't have as much nostalgia, as much joy going back to the levels of this game as I would have those two. And even just playing through this, I kind of missed some of the mechanics and some of the mini games and missions that we got in 3 and 4. And this old school approach of just dropping into a map and having a list of things to do was fun, but that's not the Tony Hawk era that I grew up really loving. I was 3, 4, and Underground. Number 22 is Back 4 Blood. This is basically Left 4 Dead 3, Left 4 Dead 4, whatever the one that we left off with. I played Left 4 Dead 2 quite a few times on Xbox 360. I never really fell in love with it. I've never really been a big multiplayer shooter person. I've said that a lot of times on this channel. I'm much more of a single player story kind of guy. And very rarely will you get a game with an online multiplayer mechanic that really sucks me in. And so I was already on the camp of probably not wanting to experience this game, but my brother-in-law said that he was going to be buying it, so I bought it so that I could play with him. And we played a couple of times, and I played a few times online on Twitch streaming and a few things by myself in the offline story mode to kind of try it out. And I think that the gunplay is very nice, it's very tight, it's very responsive. I think that graphically it's a very cool game. I think that the concept of Left 4 Dead that essentially this game is doing, because it's the same team, is a cool concept. Get a couple of people together, you shoot through and try to survive and make it through this story. Unfortunately though, this does ring true as one of those games that I just don't get a whole lot of out of, because there's not really a single player story experience. It's just go online with random people and shoot at zombies. And every single time I played online with people, I just did not enjoy it, because you got people that were obnoxious online, you got people that were not listening and were just going off on their own because they have no idea how to work as a team. You got people like that are 8-year-old kids playing this that are just screaming into the microphone the whole time, and I just don't get into that experience, and that's what this game is hinging on, unfortunately. So even trying to play it as a single player thing, all of the elements that you unlock as a single player doesn't even translate to the main game. I don't know if they fixed that or not, but any points that you make are essentially useless when you play by yourself. You're not unlocking new weapons or new cards or anything like that. You have to play online multiplayer. And so while I think this game is going to be great for Left 4 Dead fans, for me, somebody that doesn't love multiplayer experiences, this did not change that. Number 21 is going to be 12 Minutes. Now, this is a cool little indie game that I got word of and checked out on Game Pass, and it's essentially a bird's eye murder mystery style game, to where you're getting this bird's eye view in this apartment, you take a hold of this guy, and you only interact with his wife, and eventually this guy that breaks into your apartment and tries to kill you and your wife. And it's got voice acting like Willem Dafoe, so it's got professional voices. Daisy Ridley, I believe, was in there too. And what I liked about this was that it's a time loop thing, to where you get this 12-minute sequence where you get into your apartment, eventually this guy tries to break into your apartment and takes you and your wife, holds you hostage, and eventually kills you. And you have to keep going over this day, this little 12-minute interaction over and over and over again, trying to figure out why this guy's coming here, what he's looking for, some secrets involving your wife, trying to prevent everything. And I had a lot of fun going through this over and over. It was certainly frustrating, but it was like a cool frustrating, almost like solving a puzzle, to where you having to say the right things to your wife to get certain amounts of information, and then dying and using that information that you get to access something else, or to find something in your apartment, or to ask her a different question. And it was just a really cool, classic, small-scale experience. So it's certainly not big on the level of games like Back 4 Blood. It's not something that's going to be a game that you're going to play for hours and hours and hours and continuously go back to, but for what it is, it's a small, tight little indie experience. I enjoyed it. Number 20 is going to be Tormented Souls. Now, this is probably the last game that I have played on this list as far as the most recent, and so I'm only about a third of the way through it, but I've experienced enough of it to pretty much have my thoughts set in stone. This is a game that's going for that classic old school survival horror approach, with the tank controls, with the static camera, the stationary camera, with ammo scarcity and all of that. It's very much playing on the nostalgia of the early Resident Evil games, and it's pretty neat so far. It's got a really cool, creepy atmosphere with this hospital mansion. It's got some pretty neat looking villains. The actual gameplay itself is very classic old school survival horror, but it's modern enough to where it doesn't feel like absolutely dated right out of the box. There's an intriguing story going through so far. I can't comment on whether or not the story ends in the best way or not. That would either raise or lower this score a little bit. But as what the game is promising, an old school classic survival horror experience, I think that it succeeds. But I also think that's also the game's biggest detriment, is that it doesn't really have all of the newer mechanics. It doesn't learn all the lessons that we have learned over the past couple of decades from the old school classic survival horror game. It keeps all of that experience intact, including all of the flaws. The tank controls, the static camera, the ammo scarcity. It's cool, but at the same time, it's frustrating. So it's a double-edged sword. And if you're a classic survival horror fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's fun to go back and experience this as much as it's frustrating to go back and experience this. Number 19 is going to be Terminator Resistance Enhanced. Now, this is the enhanced PS5 version that came out this year. And this is not a movie tie-in. This is not something that is a licensed property that's being released alongside a big budget blockbuster in the summertime. This was just a Terminator game that they made and released, and kind of quietly. I didn't really hear much about this game, but I kept seeing it in the PSN store, decided to give it a try, and I'm so glad that I did, because this game, for all of its flaws, was one of the best Terminator games that I had ever played. Now, that's not a very high bar, but at the same time, I'm a Terminator fanatic. The second film is like my second favorite movie of all time, and I love the first one, and I even defend the sequels to a certain extent, some of them. But as a game experience, as this first-person shooter experience, going back into the, or I guess going forward to the future war, and tying in the storyline as like a prequel to the first couple of movies, I think that it was a really satisfying experience for fans. It's certainly not the biggest budget game. There's certainly some budget restrictions. It's not the most intuitive thing. It's not the most advanced gameplay in the world. It's very low budget, but I think that it performs very well despite that. I think it's a very capable game, and I don't think that many people will play this and feel like it's too low budget to have fun with. And it's basically a Far Cry game in the Terminator world. You have this open world sections, you have these little bases that you could take over, you have these mission objectives. The Terminators themselves, like the actual T-800s walking around, are a genuine threat to where if they see you, you haul ass and hide. And the weapon variety in this game is also really cool. You go from pistols to Uzis to shotguns to eventually the laser rifles and everything, the plasma rifles that the Terminators are walking around with. And just narrative-wise, I thought it was a really good story. For Terminator fans, the way that this brings another added layer to the origins of the first and the second movie, I actually think were really cool. And I thought that it was an experience that actually added a little bit to the movies. So have low expectations. Don't walk into this thinking it's going to be this awesome first-person experience. Hopefully one day we will get that from Terminator. But as a lower-budget movie tie-in game for fans, I think that this succeeds a lot more than it fails. Number 18 is going to be Riders Republic. Now, admittedly, I'm not very big on racing games. I'm not even really that good at them. That's part of the reason why I'm not a giant fan. This doesn't quite work for me. Burnout is the only series that I've ever genuinely loved as a racing game. And this game looked like it was tapping into that Burnout Paradise thing where it's an open world and you go to all these different events, and certainly Forza has made this a big thing as well. And when I was looking at advertisements for this game, I started to get a bit intrigued with it because I actually used to play a lot of Cool Borders back in the early PlayStation days. And so I figured maybe this game would tap into some of that early nostalgia that I used to have. So I bought this pretty cheap when I got my Xbox Series X, and I played quite a few hours on it. And for what it's trying to deliver, that extreme sports, open world racing style game, it's a lot of fun and it delivers a lot of great mechanics with that. You got biking, you've got skiing, you got snowboarding, there's even like wingsuits and hang gliding, I believe. And so for extreme sports fans, it's a really cool experience. Me personally, I'm just not really a big racing guy, so I had a lot of fun with this for the few hours that I have played it. I'm sure I'll go back to it at some point, but it's not really a game that hooked me, that's drawing me back to it for replay value, so I got the little bit of enjoyment that I was going to have out of it. And I think if you are a racing fan and you are an extreme sports fan, you're going to love this a lot more than I did. Number 17 is actually the first game that I got an early review copy for ever on this channel, and that is Evil Genius 2 World Domination. Now this is one of those like park builder god mode type games to where you kind of like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Sims, or where you're top down and you're building out this base and you're controlling all your different minions. And I think the actual base building and the minion management side of things is a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed the first game and liked all the newer mechanics that were brought to this. I think that it performed very well on consoles. There's a lot of really cool early 50s, 60s spy kind of tropes that are brought into this that was a lot of fun. It has a nice little cartoon style tone to it that I enjoyed. I just think that after a while the game really starts to run out of steam with the missions that it gives you, with just constantly bombarding you with enemies, and you have to constantly stop what you're doing and get rid of all these invaders. The mission objectives constantly making you go back to the world map screen was absolutely a chore, and I hated the world map screen every single time I had to go back to it. And I think that the trap system could be a little bit better, a little bit more reliable. I think that's one of the more fun aspects of the games, is creating all these different little trap segments, kind of like Rube Goldberg machines where somebody will get knocked into a shark pit or slip across the floor into an electric field or something like that. And it was never 100% reliable, so you couldn't even get like the basic enjoyment of putting these little traps together, letting people into your secret base and just seeing them kind of get tore apart. So I had a lot of fun with this. I did get a lot of replay value out of just going back, constantly trying to get through these missions and build out my base and make things a little bit more efficient and get more money and build more rooms for my money. I had a lot of fun with it. I still think there's a much better version of this game that is out there. Hopefully Evil Genius 3 will be that game. Number 16 is Jurassic World Evolution 2. Now, I was a huge fan of the first game. Apparently I'm kind of in a divisive spot with that. I think a lot of people don't like this game for some reason, but A lot of the same things that I said about Evil Genius 2, where you're building out this park and you're managing your park and managing your dinosaurs and your staff and creating things to be bigger and better and make more money. I really enjoy those types of strategy games. So I loved the first game despite getting a little bit burnout with the repetitive nature of the missions. And so I was excited about what this game was going to do to change all of that. Unfortunately, aside from adding the fast forward and the pause feature, which was strangely missing from the first game, I didn't like any of the new changes. Being able to build out different aviaries and these underwater swamps for the water dinosaurs, all of that was cool. I liked all of those changes. Graphically, the game obviously looks a little bit better, plays a little bit better, but a lot of the mission changes I did not like. And they got rid of, in a lot of the modes of this game, the different divisions, the different missions that you'll do for the science division and the security division and the entertainment division, which is how you mostly make money in the first game. And so there were so many times where I'm trying to do these story modes where I'm building out these parks, and my cash flow is 100% dependent on guests, and you can't do anything to change that. So God forbid you have a weather storm come through, or a dinosaur, one of your main dinosaurs dies, or breaks out and kills a guest, and your park rating drops, and all of a sudden your money drops. There were so many times where at least 3 or 4 times in a mission, I would be hours into a park, and then something random would happen and completely destroy my park rating, take me from millions of dollars into the red, and it felt like there was no way to get out of the red because you have to sell almost your entire damn park to get out of the red to be able to build things that you need to get your park rating back up. And so it was essentially like starting the game over. And so the game modes that required you to do that really fucking infuriated me. There was like these story mode missions where you basically just capture dinosaurs and bring them in. That was almost a waste of a mode. That was like their story mode that they added. There was this whole segment about chaos theory where you're building the different parks for each of these individual movies. Some of them were really cool. Some of them were absolutely ridiculous and pitiful. Like the Jurassic Park 3 mission was just a fucking generic waste. You just trap dinosaurs and put them in this thing and send them off in a helicopter for 2 hours. That was generic as hell. But really, it was just the missing of that general park going experience that you have to where you can build your park out, get your money flow, and also do other things to get money for yourself that was just sorely missing in a lot of the aspects of this game that just dragged it down for me. So while I still enjoyed it, I found myself getting more frustrated than having fun with this one. Number 15 is Forza Horizon 5. Now, keep in mind what I said with Riders Republic. I am not a gigantic racing fan, and I'm also not very good at racing games. So this is a franchise that I have never given a shot to. I've never played any of the Forza games, just like I've never played any of the Gran Turismo games after the first one. It's just not my genre. It's not something that I go to for fun. I don't really get into them. But with this game being on Game Pass, with seeing all of the overwhelming praise that it has been getting, I wanted to give it a shot. Now, this is potentially the best looking game on this entire list. It is an absolutely gorgeous game from start to finish. It's beautiful. I think that the racing mechanics are great. It plays very well. I think that if you are a racing fan, I understand 100% why this is probably your favorite game of the year, maybe the best racing game of all time for you. It's fucking awesome as a racing game. It's the same concept that I was talking about with Riders Republic, where it's open world and you can drive around, go to all these different events. You build things eventually to get more cars and to get more of a status, and all of that is really cool for like a campaign mode to continuously to get you to come back. And I did have fun with it for a few hours. But just like with Riders Republic, I'm just not a big racing guy. So as much as this might draw people in and make them constantly come back if you are a racing fan, I got my 3 or 4 hours of entertainment out of it, and I have yet to really have the desire to go back. I'm sure I will, as long as it's on Game Pass. This is not a game that I would go out and buy just for me personally. So I get this is much lower on my list than it probably will be for a lot of people that love this genre. But being this high for somebody that doesn't like racing games, in and of itself is a giant praise for how beautiful and how great this game really is. Number 14 is going to be Oddworld Soulstorm. Now, this is a game that I played on PlayStation Plus. It was one of the free games that came out with that. And I've played a few of the Oddworld games in the past. They're very unique. They're very different, both in the gameplay style as well as just the world and the characters and everything. But I had a lot of fun with this one. You're essentially playing Abe, and he is one of these little creatures, and you have all of the rest of your species that are in peril, that are in danger, and you have to go through this little side-scrolling world that's very cool and very Very neat the way that it's visually realized. And try to save as many of your comrades as you can, just like you did in Abe's Odyssey. And I thought that the storyline in this one was pretty good. I liked all of the newer next generation mechanics that they brought into this game. It's not necessarily a game that I would go back and replay all that often, but for the single player experience that I got out of it, I really do like playing occasional Oddworld games to get that very unique experience of trying to save as many of my people as I can, to the point where I'm doing something to where they're going and I have to like distract machine guns, and if even one of them gets killed, I want to restart and try to find the best way through it. So it's a really neat side-scrolling strategy type game that I had fun with. Number 13 is going to be Far Cry 6. Now, I'm a gigantic Far Cry fan. I actually released my ranking of the entire Far Cry franchise just a couple of weeks ago. If you want to check that out, I'll put a little card up here. But I was really anticipating this game because of Giancarlo Esposito. Now, I'm somebody that loves Far Cry 3, that is my favorite, and I've been slightly disappointed in every Far Cry since, just because it hasn't quite reached the heights of Far Cry 3 for me, while still enjoying all of them. And there's been this ongoing criticism with the Far Cry franchise that it's essentially the same game over and over again. They might improve it a little bit, they might update the graphics, they might bring in a couple of new mechanics here and there, but essentially it's the same thing. And I've never really felt that until Far Cry 6. Far Cry 6 felt like a greatest hits of all of the Far Cry games, where they put mechanics of all of them and took out certain things. And that practice alone really made me jump into this game, and after a couple hours feeling like I've played this before. Didn't think that the story or the main characters, including the villain, unfortunately, were all that engaging, were all that interesting, and that really sucks to say about a Giancarlo Esposito character. I'm a Breaking Bad fanatic, so that was a big disappointment for me. The gunplay and everything's great, the graphics are great. I thought that the world itself was realized really well. But the side missions and all of the busy work that you have is just kind of the same stuff. They got rid of the skill tree, which I hated. Now you just have all these different little pieces of equipment to give you certain skills. I thought that that was a giant mistake. So I enjoyed this game. I played a lot of hours into it. I beat the main story. I got a lot of the trophies. But this is the first Far Cry game that I played in a while to where I really don't have the desire to go back to it and get all of the side missions, get all of the trophies. I've platinumed most of the Far Cry games. I don't know if I'm going to platinum this one because I've just got bored with it very quickly. Number 12 is going to be Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the remaster that came out. Now, admittedly, this is something that seems to be very divisive. There's a lot of people that think that this is an absolute garbage release, that they've had a lot of problems with it, especially if you bought it on PC. Apparently, you haven't even been able to play it yet. And I'm just somebody, I have not really had that many issues with it. I've played through most of Grand Theft Auto 3. I played at least 4 hours or so on Vice City, about the same on San Andreas, and I have not really had that many issues with it. So maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe I haven't made it to certain parts of the game that are giving people issues, but to me, this was a gigantic nostalgia bomb. This was something that, I'm somebody that has not been excited about Grand Theft Auto, or really anything that Rockstar has done in quite a long time. After Grand Theft Auto 4, I've been really burnt out on Rockstar, especially the Grand Theft Auto style games, even Red Dead, to where it's just, I'm done with it. It's just the same thing over and over. We're gonna make the world bigger, and it's the same game. That's kind of how I felt about Grand Theft Auto. But I have a ton of nostalgic love for 3, Vice City, and San Andreas. That was the generation that kind of kicked off these games. I was the perfect age to play them. Those were some of my favorite games of all time back in the day. So when they talked about bringing a remastered version to modern consoles, I was really excited to go back and try to re-experience some of my early Grand Theft Auto love, and that's exactly what it did. Even the very old school approach of Grand Theft Auto 3, I had a blast going through the old school version of Liberty City. Vice City was always my favorite, so I've loved playing through that, experiencing that old school soundtrack and the voice acting and that very Scarface ripoff style story. So to me, all of the issues that have really hindered this release for a lot of people, I have not experienced yet. I'm not bothered that there's, 25% of the songs missing from here. It doesn't really bug me all that much. So I'm somebody that purely off of nostalgia and reliving those glory days, I have had a ton of fun off of this release and really have gotten my money's worth. Number 11 is Kena Bridge of Spirits. This is probably the best indie game that I have played all year round. It's something that I was really looking forward to ever since seeing the trailer. It seemed like a really fun, charming type of game. And it was one of the more quieter releases, because when I bought this, I started playing it on Twitch, and nobody really knew what I was playing, although they were enjoying watching me. And eventually I started to see this game get a lot more praise. I think it won a couple of awards at the Video Game Awards, so it's a title that's definitely worth your attention, and it's one of the more affordable titles. It's a lower budget game. But you would not know that with the production of the game. Graphically, the way that it plays, the production value, it's all like AAA game style. It's all that level of quality. I think that the story was really good. I think that while certainly being reminiscent of certain games we played before, the gameplay mechanics of, you know, being this kind of third-person action game, exploration, open world type thing was really fun. And I think the boss battles were a nice mix of being challenging while also being fun. And there was certain aspects to it that I actually think this is some of the best boss battles that I played all year round. It's a little bit short. It's not something that I certainly would feel good about paying $60 for, but that's never been the price that they've charged for it. So it's a game that I really got a lot out of. I thought that it was a damn good game for what it was trying to do. And for being an indie release, I think that it matched the quality of a lot of these AAA titles that we pay out the ass for. So for me, got more than my money's worth with Kena, and if you have not played it yet, I think that it's one that you should definitely check out if you like that style of game. Number 10 is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I'm somebody, because of how disappointing Marvel's Avengers were, that I had no interest in this game. I was like, this is probably going to be just the same trash that Avengers was. I'm not going to enjoy this. The advertisements weren't doing anything to convince me. And then it came out very quietly. And all of a sudden I started seeing all this praise and all these people saying that it was one of the most biggest surprises of the year, one of the best single player experiences they've had in a long time, nowhere near the disappointment of Avengers. And so it piqued my interest, and eventually I bought it. And for the first half or so of the game, I saw what everybody else was seeing. I thought that it was a really fun single player linear experience, which is something we don't get a whole lot of nowadays. I thought that the voice acting, the interaction with the characters was a lot of fun. Graphically and everything, it was really good. It was a very different but familiar enough version of the Guardians to where if you only know the versions on the MCU movies, which that would be me, you could still get into these characters and it doesn't feel like this foreign version. And so I had a lot of fun with it. But eventually this game got so repetitive, which is why it's not in my top 5. It got to the point where the enemy fights and all of the puzzle mechanics and the way that the levels were laid out were so wash, rinse, and repeat that the last half of this game I really had to kind of dreck through. To the point where the game just never felt like it was going to end. There was an ending, and then there was another ending, and then there was another ending. And so the back half of this game really kind of tarnished my experience a bit. I still enjoyed it overall. It's still pretty high on my list overall, so I think it's worth checking out if you are a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, or if you're craving an old school linear single player experience. But for me, I just wish they would have put a little bit more variety into the gameplay, to where it just felt like the game almost should have been shorter if they were that low on ideas on how to change things up. Now, while I'm somebody that doesn't really enjoy online multiplayer games, I have always been a giant fan of couch co-op, of local co-op. Those are some of my favorite video game experiences in my life, is playing something with my brother or my best friend, to where we're sitting there together, working together through this game. And it's just that bonding experience, that being in the same room. I just feel like online multiplayer you can never recreate, and I've always had that disconnect with it for that reason. And you don't really get that many games nowadays that embrace couch co-op. It's always online. You always look at the box and it's like 1 player, but 2 to 16 online. Very rarely is it 2 player. It Takes Two is a game that says, to hell with all of that, we're going back to that co-op experience. And I've been playing this with my wife. I assume we're only a couple hours away from the end because we've been playing it for quite a long time. And this is some of the most fun co-op that I have had in years, especially playing with my wife, being that the story itself is about a couple on the rocks kind of working through their relationship through this little adventure. Not that we're on the rocks, but it's just a fun experience with the husband and the wife humor to experience together. And so you essentially have these 2 characters, which are these handmade doll versions of this little girl's parents, where the parents are getting divorced and her tears magically turn her parents into these dolls that she created. And all throughout the game, you're essentially trying to figure out a way to get back to your human bodies. And so you're going through the house. There's a whole level about going through the shelves and fighting an evil vacuum. You eventually go outside and you're trying to traverse the trees, and you have to team up with squirrels against these honeybees or these wasps. And there's an underwater level where you're playing like a pirate ship type thing. There's a lot of variety to the worlds. There's a lot of variety to the gameplay, to the boss battles. But for me, the biggest success of this is that it's a game that really does hone into why that co-op experience, that local co-op experience is so fun, because there's so many times where you have to do something specific while your partner does something specific, and you have to really communicate and figure out things together, which is the whole theme of the game, is parents working together and collaborating. That it makes me very nostalgic, and it makes me want more games like this, at least an option to play with couch co-op. So this is some of the most fun that I've had all year round. The game would be a little bit higher if some of the mini games and the side stuff felt a little bit more necessary. They really just kind of feel like distractions from the main game more than they do a complement. But other than that, I think that this is a damn good co-op experience. And especially if you're somebody that has a significant other that likes to play video games, this is a must play. Number 8 is going to be Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. This was the first true next generation game on the PS5. This was the first game that you had to have a PlayStation 5 to play. And it fully realized a lot of the potential of this new generation and of the PS5 with the graphical capability, with the speed and the refresh rates, and having all these different dimensions coexisting at once. It was an amazing display, both visually as well as intuitively, with the DualSense controller, of what the PS5's potential is. I'm really a fan of the Ratchet and Clank games. Unfortunately, I was late to the party though. I missed a lot of the early games, but I really became a fan later on in the series. I loved the reboot version on PS4, and so I was really looking forward to this one. And gameplay-wise, story-wise, character-wise, graphic-wise, all of that, they knocked it out of the park. This was an incredible Ratchet and Clank game, easily one of the best of the franchise, and that seems to be something that universally everybody is saying. So even somebody that's not as experienced with the franchise, I'm saying the same thing as somebody that's played since the first game for the most part. The only thing that held this game back for me, and why it's not top 3, top 5, was the replay value. I got every single trophy in this game in one play. So this is not a game that really merits or gives you extra reasons or different unlockables or anything to go back and experience the story again. And that was a little disappointing for me. I like when a game, you can get a lot of merit out of one gameplay, but then there's things that you unlock or things that are different or extra trophies or some kind of a challenge to go back and replay the game for. And this game was focusing more on accessibility and ease and everything like that, to the point where I feel like I got everything out of this game in one run, and I've never really had the desire to go back. So replayability is big for me. That was the only thing that knocked this back from the top, but it's still one of the best games of the year. Number 7 is going to be Metroid Dread. Now, this is a game that I was not all that interested in at first. Now, I played Metroid games before, but they were the Metroid Prime games. They were the first-person shooter versions. And so that's something that I'm really waiting for, is the next Metroid Prime game. I never really experienced the side-scrolling Metroids. And so when they decided to go back and do that before doing another Metroid Prime, I was kind of disappointed, to the point where I didn't really want to even give this game any time, because I'm like, whatever, just give me Prime, quit fucking around. And so when this game came out and started getting a lot of praise, started getting a lot of awards, and everybody was just hailing the return of Metroid, it started to pique my interest a little bit. But it wasn't until I saw David Jaffe, who is the game creator of Twisted Metal and God of War. He has a YouTube channel, and he was getting a lot of flack online for criticizing some of the mechanics of Metroid Dread, and it just piqued my interest enough. It had been on sale at that point, and I was like, you know what? I gotta see where on this scale I am. You know, is it one of the best games of the year, or do I agree with Jaffe? And so I bought the game and started playing it. And I gotta be honest with you, at least the first 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of this game, I was in love. I thought this was easily going to be like in my top 3 games of the year. It was such a gigantic surprise. It had all of those Metroid Prime mechanics, but in that original side-scrolling form. And much to my surprise, I was okay with that. I liked the side scrolling when I thought that that was probably going to annoy me. I liked the exploration. I liked the whole Metroid style game where you get a device and you have to go back and backtrack and get something new and then go back over here. I like that style of gameplay. I thought that the shooting mechanics was awesome. I loved the whole stealth mechanic where you get these little robots that are following you around and you have to sneak around them until you get powered up enough to come and take them down. And even then, it's still a pretty tense sequence when you're trying to take these robots down. The boss battles were, just like with Kena Bridge of Spirits, a nice mix of challenging and fun. Probably even more challenging than Kena, honestly. The only thing that knocked this back from being in my top 3 of the year was that the last act of the game I felt got a bit too boss battle heavy, to the point where it was just boss battle, boss battle, boss battle, boss battle. And the bosses are pretty fucking challenging in this game, so they will bring you to the point of wanting to break your controller just when you figure out the right mix of moves and the right patterns to be able to beat these things. And there's even some boss battles where it's very much luck, to where you have to luck out and get a certain sequence of attacks to really be able to hold on to enough health or enough of your rockets to be able to survive this boss battle, unless you're just a fucking Metroid badass. And so the last couple hours of this game really being bogged down with all of these boss battles and all these interactions kind of left the end of the game not really a bad taste in my mouth, but I didn't walk out of the game with as much enjoyment as I did through most of the experience. I thought that the pacing really was killed in the last act of the game. So it's not enough, obviously, to knock it very far down. This is still one of the best games of the year, and it's not a bad final act of the game. I just felt like it got a little bit cumbersome. So if you're a Metroid fan, this was absolutely a must play. If you're curious about this, definitely check it out. And I cannot wait eventually for them to do a Metroid Prime 4. This has got my blood thick again for Metroid. Number 6 is going to be Returnal. Now, this was a game that came out, maybe this was the first PS5 game. I don't know. It was either this or Ratchet and Clank. Somebody will correct me if they haven't already. But Returnal was one of the first true next-generation releases for PS5. And like I said before when I was talking about Hades, I'm not somebody that's had a lot of experience with roguelite games, so I really wasn't sure if I was going to like this. It looked kind of cool, but in the early trailers back when they announced the PS5, I really had no interest in it. I didn't know what it was, and it just didn't really drag me in. But I started seeing a lot of praise in the early reviews. I started watching a lot of videos of what the game actually is, and I started to get intrigued. So I bought this, and I gotta tell you, I was pretty damn addicted to it for a while. And this is the only game at the top of this list that I have not finished. And I do plan on going back eventually. Unfortunately, the release of my number 1 screwed me on this one, because then I got absolutely addicted to that one, and then it was like months before I was ready to go back to Returnal. But this is a game that I think has a nice balance between challenge and fun, to where you do have that one shot to a certain extent, to where if you die, you go all the way back to the beginning, and I think that that adds a certain amount of tension to the game. Going out and getting additional weapons and upgrades and all of this before you die, so that each run you're a little bit more well prepared. I really enjoyed. The boss battles were really fun. Graphically, the world, the biomes, as well as the enemies were really cool and really well realized. The story is very intriguing, with this woman that's stuck on this planet, stuck in this time loop, and you're trying to figure out why. And there's even a point in the game, I got through the first half of the game, which feels like it's coming to an end. Spoiler alert, I guess. And there's a point in the game where you actually feel like you have resolved the story, and then it loops you back and you start again, to where my interest in the game was completely refreshed and renewed at that point, because I was even more intrigued of what the hell was going on then. So I'm somebody that really wants to get back to this game once I get some time to. And I think there's been an update now where there's actual checkpoints, which will make it a little bit easier to get through. But this was a damn good third-person shooter experience, a damn good roguelite experience, and a great showcase of the potential of the PS5, especially with the DualSense controller and those haptic feedbacks, like with the rainfall and everything like that. So I loved Returnal. Can't wait to go back and finish it. Number 5 is the one Oculus Quest title that I have played thus far, and that is Resident Evil 4 VR. Now, admittedly, I am a Resident Evil fanboy, and I'm a Resident Evil 4 fanatic. This is my second favorite game of all time, only behind the original Metal Gear Solid, and it's the game that I have beaten the most amount of times. Every single time they port this damn thing over to a new system, I get suckered in and I want to play it and I get that vibes of nostalgia, and I always buy the new port, including this one, mostly because they were revamping the entire game for this first-person VR experience, and I just had to experience it. I literally bought an Oculus Quest just so I could experience this game. That's how much of a fan I am. And I was blown the fuck away at how awesome this retooling of this game is, to where I have played and experienced this game so many times it would probably make the average fan want to vomit. And they have brought so much new and so much different to the experience of this game with that first-person VR mechanic that it feels like a completely different game. The tension is higher, the actual mechanics during the puzzles are more fun because you physically get to interact with it. Even just the exploration of this world is cool to just look around and visualize in full VR. I'm only about a third of the way through the game. And that's how much I love what this game has given me. It's just the first third of this game has made it this high on this list. When I finish this, who knows? This might be one of my favorite games of all time. And it's just amazing to me that they can go back and take a game that was released for the original GameCube and retool it this much for VR to where I want them to go back and do it with other games. Like, I'm somebody that when I played Resident Evil Biohazard in VR and PlayStation VR, that was the scariest video game experience and one of the best survival horror experiences that I have ever had. And just the concept of them being able to take that concept and put it into my favorite Resident Evil game, my intrigue was through the roof. And so far what I've experienced has done nothing but surpass what my expectations and hopes were for this game. So I don't necessarily recommend going out and buying a $300 device just to play this game unless you are an absolute diehard fanatic like I am. But if you already have the Oculus Quest, or if you are a diehard fanatic, I'm telling you, this game is so fucking incredible that I do not regret one bit paying $300 to play this game. Now, obviously, I'm going to get a lot more money and a lot more time out of my Oculus Quest, so it's not like I'm throwing it away after I'm done with Resident Evil 4, but even if that was the only game you could play on the Oculus Quest, I feel like I'm getting my money's worth. That's how awesome this is. Number 4, by far the biggest surprise of the year for me personally, is Halo Infinite. I'm somebody that is not a big fan of the Halo franchise. I've never been. I've played them since the beginning. I've played the original Combat Evolved quite a bit on the original Xbox. I bought Halo 2 day one. Halo 3 I did outright skip, and a lot of people say that's the fan favorite, so maybe I messed up with that. But I played pretty much all of these games, and every single time I play one, I just always feel like it's missing something. I always feel like the level of praise and the level of acclaim and hype that it gets just never anywhere close to where my experience is with the game. For as much as I have a lot of nostalgic love for that original Combat Evolved, it just never was this game that I thought was one of the greatest things ever. And so I've always had a little bit of a resistance to the Halo fandom and to the Halo franchise because it always feels like it's way overhyped and way overpraised. Now with Halo Infinite, what intrigued me a lot about this game was the fact that they were going to be bringing this open world concept. And while on the surface I was like, I don't know if that's going to change my issues with this game, if that's going to fix anything, or if it's just going to be something different, but I'm at least intrigued with a new Halo game, and it's been a long time since I've been that way. So I was able to be one of the lucky few to secure a pre-order for the Halo Infinite Limited Edition Xbox Series X. And so my system came with Halo Infinite already pre-downloaded, and I have been absolutely blown away with how much I love this fucking game. It's by far my favorite Halo game. If I was to do a ranking right now, this would be number 1, easily. And it's not even close. The multiplayer, which is all that I had to experience for the first almost month that I had my Series X, is the most fun that I have had with multiplayer since Uncharted 2. I've said numerous times in this video, I'm not a multiplayer guy. I don't enjoy it for the most part. It's just not my thing. I have loved this. I have loved the combat mechanics. I have loved the old school yet modern approach to the weapons and to the game modes. I have loved the way that they score everything. I've enjoyed some of the challenges. The only thing that I have not liked, which they have fixed a couple of times since, was how much you have to play this game to level up which they fixed significantly. And I've also disliked the challenges being things that kind of take away from the main objectives of the game, which apparently they're fixing as well. But with those couple of grievances aside, I have played at least 10 hours of Halo Infinite multiplayer since I got it, which is about 9.5 hours more than any other multiplayer game I've played in decades. So just that alone has been a gigantic surprise for me, and I will continuously be going back and playing Halo Infinite multiplayer as long as this thing has got juice in it. And when the campaign dropped, I was very excited because by then I've already been sold on Halo Infinite. I'm already loving the multiplayer. I'm already excited for what the campaign's going to bring. And the open world version of Halo is absolutely a giant fix to my biggest issue with Halo. When I started playing this game, the first hour and a half or so, I realized what my biggest problem with Halo is, and that it's so linear that I always get bored with it. It's just walk through these hallways, walk through these little arena things, and shoot the same enemies that you've been shooting since the early 2000s. And while some people love that, I have always felt bored by it. I even went back and played the first 4 missions of Halo 3 before the Halo Infinite campaign came out, trying to kind of get caught up maybe with the level of excitement that I had on the Halo multiplayer. I really wanted to go back and play some of these games that I had missed out on in leading up to the Halo Infinite campaign release. And I just could not get through them. As much as everybody loves Halo 3, I was just like, this is boring the fuck out of me. I'm just shooting the same enemies over and over and over again, walking around doing the same things. And the first hour and a half of this game was that way. And as soon as they opened up the world and you walked outside onto this Halo ring and you could go anywhere, and you have these side missions and you have these little assassination targets and you have these different bases you can take over and these different collectibles that you can find and these little broadcast towers that you have to blow up. It's essentially like a Far Cry version of Halo. I loved it. To me, that fixed all of my main issues with Halo, which is the linear aspect of their campaigns. And me being able to go out and do whatever I wanted at any time and explore and grab vehicles and do these little side objectives and attack the story at my own pace, I enjoyed the living hell out of that. Still some negatives with it. I think that some of the open world aspects to it were not fully realized. There's reports out there that this game was supposed to be about 3 times bigger than what it is, but they scaled back to get the game out faster, and you can feel that. And I think some of the side missions regarding the bases and the collectibles, they feel very reminiscent of games that came out about 10 years ago. So I think that Halo coming into the open world, they did a lot more small-scale focused version of that, and I would rather them do that and do it well than to try to do this huge concept and do it kind of shitty. So overall, I'm satisfied with it, but I think that they have a lot more room to grow with the open world Halo. If they continue with this for Halo Infinite 2 or some DLC, I think that there's much better side missions and much better things to fill out this open world than what we got with the base game. But the story I really enjoyed, all the different boss battles, the themes of the story with Cortana and what her legacy meant, and I did catch up on the story before I played Halo Infinite with some YouTube videos, so I was aware of what the backstory was between Cortana's fall and all of that. I loved this game. So it's something that I was absolutely addicted to all the way through. I've gotten all of the collectibles, I've gotten all the bases, I've done every possible thing you can do in this open world, and I have never had that experience with a Halo game. So if you are a Halo fan, I think it's 50-50. You're either gonna really want that linear experience and dislike the open world, or this is gonna be the best thing ever for you. But as somebody that has always had that linear issue with the campaigns, this was exactly what I needed. So if you're like me and have never liked Halo for those reasons, definitely give Halo Infinite a shot. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Hitman 3. I have always loved this franchise, but I have especially fallen in love with this new iteration, this new reboot style of the Hitman franchise that started last generation with Hitman 1, which was like an episodic online release. They followed it up with Hitman 2, which they released all at once. And then they have closed out, supposedly, although I'm sure we're going to get more eventually, with Hitman 3 that was both a next-gen and a previous-gen release. And Hitman 3 takes everything that was done with Hitman 1 and 2, and for the most part improves. I'm still admittedly a little bit partial to Hitman 2 just because the missions in that game I think are my favorite of this trilogy, but Hitman 3 really does take that concept and just perfects it on every technical level. Essentially, these new Hitman games takes the initial Hitman concept where you're dropped into this world with a target, with a certain objective, and you have this sandbox style approach where you have a bunch of different ways you can go about this assassination. You can go guns blazing, you can go stealth, you can use certain disguises. There's a bunch of different ways to get to your target, a bunch of different ways to get out, and they expand that up into this gigantic open world map, to where each individual mission almost feels like an individual game, to the point where this is the only game I can think of to where when I beat a mission, I will go back and replay that same mission for hours before ever going on to the next mission. And I did that even with Hitman 3, to where you play the first mission, you kill your target, and then you unlock all these certain information and these different little objectives and these different little mini storylines to where they give you a little bit of a more drawn out path to how to kill your target in certain ways. Of course, I'm a trophy whore too, so the trophies give you certain hints about how to do certain things. And I just had an absolute blast with this game, going over and over and over through these different maps and finding every which way I could go about this mission to some certain hilarious results sometimes with the different assassinations that are available for your characters. So I adore this franchise. I think that now is the best time, if ever, to jump into this franchise. If you buy Hitman 3, the missions, if you've already bought Hitman 1 and 2, get brought into your save, but I'm sure there's like a PSN or an Xbox Live bundle out there. Go out and buy the Hitman Trilogy, and this game will give you hundreds of hours of gameplay. And to me, this is one of the best action assassination games out there. I love the sandbox approach to it, and for how simple the concept is, you're talking about endless replayability. Number 2 for me came very close to being number 1. It was one of the biggest surprises this year. It's a game that I've been looking forward to, but did not think it was going to be as awesome as it was. And that is Deathloop, which as of right now is a PlayStation timed exclusive. It will be released to the Xbox in 2022, so if you're an Xbox fan, definitely pick it up when it does come out. Essentially, this is taking the time loop concept, kind of like roguelite, but not exactly the same, to where you get one shot in this timeline and you are continuously trying to get information and find out different things about your targets to where eventually you can have that one successful go. And you're on this island that is ran by all of these different people. And essentially you've got 7 or 8 different targets that you have to take all of them out in one loop in order to break the time loop. And so every single time you drop into this game, you're essentially pursuing one of your targets to find more information about them or where they're going to be or how to draw them out of that place and get them somewhere else, maybe next to another target. And you just keep replaying these different zones on this island and trying not to die, because dying will reset your loop, trying to get all the information and set all the little chess pieces in play so that eventually, in order to beat the game, you go through in one shot, in one loop, and take out all 7 or 8 of these targets. And I had an absolute blast. I was absolutely addicted to this game, trying to get through to that objective. I had so much fun with the gameplay mechanics in the first person. I love Dishonored, and it's the same studio that did Dishonored, so it's very similar with some of the powers that you get, like with Blink, essentially, where you can teleport to certain places. There's other powers you get that you can like levitate people, you can take people over, and there's a bunch of different gameplay mechanics that makes it just a fun sandbox experience for that reason alone. But I just really love the whole time loop concept and trying my best to just kind of weather the storm and get through all these different challenges in order to get that one perfect loop. Unfortunately, once you get that perfect loop and you beat the game, I don't think the game has a whole lot of replay value outside of that, which is the only reason it's not number 1. But you have a ton of replay value throughout the whole first go of the game, to where you're replaying these sections over and over and over and over again, trying to get that objective. So I guess I kind of understand they front load it with replay value rather than going back and playing through the whole story again. But I would love to see a sequel to this. I would love to see a revisit of this concept from this studio. I thought it was an absolute blast of a game. A lot of good humor and a lot of good style to it with the visual style that they chose. So I loved Deathloop. But number 1 for me is Resident Evil Village. And it's not just because I'm a Resident Evil fanboy. This game was genuinely awesome. This is the game that I played the most this generation, or this year I should say. It's a game that I literally replayed about 15 times before I was done with it. I'm 1 trophy shy of the platinum, and it's because of that damn mercenaries mode. So I don't know how long it's going to be before I have enough interest to go back and suffer through those to get that last trophy. But the storyline here as a follow-up to 7 I thought was awesome. I thought that the werewolves and the village and the witches and all these new concepts brought into Resident Evil was a great change of pace. I liked all the bosses. I really liked the whole somewhat sandbox feel to where you have like this central hub, which is the village, and you have these different places to go off to experience the different boss battles. I kind of wish you could attack them at your own pace. I wish they would have expanded that sandbox to that point, but being linear to that degree didn't really hurt the game. It's just a small thing that I think would make it a little bit more fun to replay. I think that the shooting and all of the different weapons that you get is very tight mechanically. Graphically, it looks great. I did a full review of this game. I've reviewed a bunch of different things regarding Resident Evil, so I'll try to put a playlist up here for all of my Resident Evil content. But as a Resident Evil fan, this was my most anticipated game of the year. And as a Resident Evil fan, I was satisfied to the point where this is easily my favorite game of the year. Came close with Deathloop. Deathloop was that dark horse surprise. And if I had had the replay value that I had with Village, it would have been #1 just for the unique concept alone. But I was absolutely sucked into this game. Like I said with Returnal, I was balls deep in Returnal. Village dropped. I played Village. I live streamed my entire first playthrough, and in two sittings the first day, I beat the game and was just addicted to this thing for like the next 3-4 weeks. So I thought it was incredible. I can't wait for the 8th chapter, however they're going to close out this trilogy, potentially close out the franchise. I think it left the coals absolutely white hot for Resident Evil fans, and it is my #1. So what do you guys think about my ranking of the video games of 2021 that I have played? Let me know your list down below. Of course, keep in mind this stuff is subjective, guys. I know that those that are going to get angry and bitchy in the comments have already went down there before they got to this point in the video, but just try to understand where I come from. We all have different tastes. We all like different subgenres and different franchises, so let me know down below. Be sure to check down below for the link to Zach Pope's video where he is doing his ranking of the games that he has played in 2021. Please hit the subscribe button if you are a fan of this content. I am going to be doing a secondary channel where I'm going to put all of my video game content on in 2022. But for right now, anything that I do, you need to hit the subscribe button to check that out, as well as if you like movie content, that's where all of that content is staying, is on this channel. So please like and share this video and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of that. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.